really like what you're doing with the Tayde Aburto show, and I wanted to offer you some information that I think not only will it be interesting for your audience, but it'll also be interesting for you personally. And I'll come back to why in a second. But every year, the Inter-American Dialogue, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., issues a report with the numbers for family remittances from Latin America and the Caribbean. These are Latinos that live in the United States that send money back to their families in those 33 countries. And, roughly every year, it's about $100 billion that gets sent back to those countries.
A
Okay?
100 billion with a B.
With a B, that's right. Now, the official figures for 2020 have not been released, but one of the countries in that region, Mexico, our country, released their figures last week. And what they said was that Mexicans living in the United States sent back $40.6 billion to Mexico. Okay?
Wow.
So my prediction is that the number of remittances sent to the entire region will be dramatically higher than 100 billion in 2020. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, meanwhile, there's a research firm that does all the numbers for the venture capital industry in the United States called Pitchbook, and they issued their figures last week as well. And they said that U.S. venture capital funds raised a combined $69 billion in 2020. So the delta between ordinary immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean living in the United States and the entire super rich VC ecosystem in the United States is to the favor of the financial power of the immigrant Latina and Latinos. Can you
That's
believe
amazing. Amazing.
So, what I wanted to do with you today is I wanted to talk to you about why our narrative, the narrative of immigrant Latinos, both you and I were born in Mexico, so we're both immigrants. We're not even first generation. Why our narrative doesn't reflect that power. Like, before I give you my reasons, would you like to tell me why you think our narrative doesn't reflect that power?
Well, we're too busy working, so we don't take that much time to promote these numbers. And I you know what? It is pretty impressive, Sergio, that we're talking about 100 billion in 1 year. This is not like a decade or anything like that. So when you put that number in perspective, I think we have to do a better job at sharing this narrative with not just in the US, but with the world pretty much, so people understand the valuable contributions that we have for this country.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I want to take you back a little bit, Tayde, and I want to tell you, what narratives we have been able to either assume or embrace or adopt. The first American narrative for the Latino was as the bracero. So you could think of that like you could put a face on it, and that face is Cesar Chavez. Okay? The second narrative that we created, and I'm going to attribute it to Henry Cisneros, although he might not have came up with it originally, but he really was the one who tried to popularize it. And that's the narrative of the sleeping giant. Okay? And so I don't think either of those two narratives are particularly helpful for me and you. You and I are neither braceros, nor do I think that we see ourselves as sleeping giants. And so I was trying to create a third narrative. And the reason why I was doing that was I was on a Zoom last year with Dr. Manuel Pastor at USC, and he told me something that really impressed me. He said, Sergio, because you know how to write, why don't you rewrite our narrative? And why don't you place ourselves as the protagonist? And last week, I had the good fortune to talk to Jose Quinones at the Mission Asset Fund, and he doubled down and he said, you really should define, shape, and articulate this narrative for us. And so, as I was beginning to imagine what the face of our new narrative would look like, what the protagonist of our new narrative looked like, for some reason, Tayde, I kept picturing your daughter.
Hmm.
And I wanted to see what you thought of that. There's two descriptors that are set, and then there's a third that I'm going to tell you at the end, which is the one that I chose. But at least the first one is young. I think young is a great descriptor for our protagonist. The second is female, which I think it would also be great. And then the third, I'm going to leave up in the air for a second. And I'm just going to ask you, what do you think of having our protagonist look like your daughter?
You know what, Sergio, I completely agree with you. And I think what we're living right now with the opportunity that we just saw a women leader to get elected as the new vice president of the United States of America, I think a lot of young women are paying attention to that. What it looked like it was impossible in the past, there is no longer that barrier. Now they can like if you have young women, young Latinas that are interested in politics, for example, now they can know they can get to the White House, and I'm pretty sure that in our lifetime, Sergio, we will see the first women elected as president of the United States. I think we're pretty close to see that, and and when you have young Latinas like my daughter who are paying attention to all this, some of them have the character to be leaders in their classrooms or in their schools or communities, etc. They're already getting the job done. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have that new generation of young Latinas writing the third narrative in our community. And we have to be open to accept that possibility and support it in any way that we can.
Absolutely. So I agree with you. Now, here's where I'm going to throw you a curveball, David. I don't know, let's just do this exercise real quick. When you're explaining or describing your daughter to somebody who doesn't know her, what are the words that you choose to use?
Man, the one that I'm choosing right now is ambitious.
Okay.
If you ask her what she's gonna be when she grows up, she tells you that she's gonna be the first trillionaire woman in the world. She wants to be a trillionaire.
Okay.
And I'm gonna tell you something. I want to do a little pause and share something with you, because I think in our culture, for some reason, we tend to be afraid of money, or we think like thinking like that it's crazy. Like, oh, no digas tonterías, nunca vas a ser trillonarios los besos, something like that. And in our situation, what my wife and I are doing with our children, whatever thought that they have that it may sound crazy for some people, we never put it down. So we try to ask them like, oh yeah, you want to be a trillionaire, right? Yeah. How do you think you're going to accomplish that? And then she starts going on and on about the different things that she's going to do. And then we're like, okay, you know what? That's a great idea. What if we start working on this and that? So instead of us trying to limit those dreams, my wife and I have made a commitment to support them in any capacity that we can. Whether it is going to a really good university, or if they decide decide to go the entrepreneurial way at a very young age, support that effort. We just want to make sure that they understand the impact of their decisions and that they commit to whatever decision that they make in life. And just like my daughter, I'm pretty confident that there are a lot of young women out there, young girls, young Latinas that can take the lead in our community, Sergio. I mean, if I can translate that ambitious word into different areas of her life, if in whatever direction she decides to go, I know that she's going to be very successful. If she goes into music, or she loves playing piano, for example, I know that if she really takes that path, she's going to be a great piano player. Or if she goes, like sports and plays soccer, I know she's going to be a great soccer player because she's really committed at everything that she does. And right now we're seeing some great Latina leaders in our community, like taking the lead in different aspects in our society. So we're already seeing that trend happening, and it's just a matter of time for us to acknowledge someone like, like the version of Cesar Chavez, or someone that will come out with a new idea like Henry Cisneros. Like finally he got, and I mean the sleeping giant finally woke up in the last election. So I think the third narrative definitely can be written by a Latina leader.
All right. Well, I agree with you completely. But I started playing this game of Mad Libs, and I had to choose what would be the third word to describe our protagonist. And I know, since you and I go on television and we go on the radio together a lot, I know, like, for example, that you would describe your daughter as young, female, and sensitive, right? Like,
Mm.
that would be a word that would naturally come up, right?
Well, if there are a couple of traits that are very common in leaders that can engage the community, I think that they are humble, and they have the sensitivity to acknowledge the different needs of different groups, even when you are not part of a certain group. So you have to have that sensitivity to understand that, well, you and I know that all the Latinos in the US are not the same, right? So we
Right.
have similarities in culture. Well, we all speak Spanish, or the majority of us speak Spanish. So we have certain similarities, but we have a lot of differences. So if we're talking about a leader that is going to start writing this third narrative, I think it has to be a leader that is sensitive and also humble. You have to be humble to listen to the different needs that people have, digest those needs, and put it back in a way that is going to resonate with them, so you can start gaining that support in a meaningful way. So
Absolutely.
I agree with you, sensitivity, and I have to add to that equation, humble,
Okay. Humility.
humility.
So
Yeah.
I'm a part of a group here in the United States that's called Closing the Wealth Gap, Closing the Women's Wealth Gap.
Mm-hmm.
And um, they have a newsletter, and every other day or so I get new entries into their newsletter, and the head of the Closing the Women's Wealth Gap initiative sent an email a week ago, and at the bottom of the email it said two things that really resonated with me, and that was that she was furious and that she was traumatized.
Mm.
And I think she was referring, I don't want to put words into her mouth, but I think she was referring to how she felt for the last 4 years,
Mm.
is really what caused her to write those two words.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but as I was inspired by it, I said, wow, what would happen if Tayde had to begin to describe his 8-year-old daughter as young, female, and furious. Like,
Oh, she has some fire in her. I'm telling you.
that's right. And so um, I didn't see that as a negative. I saw
No.
that as an actually really positive way to begin to reimagine our future protagonist.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree.
And
Because if you don't have that fire inside of you, Sergio, it's very difficult that you can accomplish anything. And especially when you want to take on a task that is that big. I mean, we're talking about Cesar Chavez here. It was a very positive, large movement that happened in the history of this country. Then you have other Latino leaders like Henry Cisneros talking about like, hey, we're the sleeping giants. We need to get more involved in politics and the economic, society, etc. So when you're talking about someone that can write a third narrative, for sure we have to uh, find a person that has that fire. Like and it's furious about something. It's furious about a necessity in our community that is not being addressed, and that person wants to change that for good. So it's furious about that. So you need to have that energy inside of you to go through different challenges and to make things happen. Because if you are passive and introvert and stuff, I mean, it's very difficult that you can accomplish something like that unless you are like coding and you can like hack systems and stuff. Otherwise, I mean, if you're gonna be a public figure trying to engage the community as a whole at a massive scale, we're not just talking like in LA or Houston or New York. This is a nationwide effort. You're gonna have to find someone that has that fire and that energy inside to make things happen.
absolutely. So I agree with you, and I was able to collaborate it with one of my academic partners, and her name is Dr. Marla Parker. She's a professor at Cal State Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
and I ran it by her, and I want to show you what she said as well, Tayde. But thank you for having me on the show, and I'll leave you with Dr. Marla Parker.
No, thank you, Sergio. And before we play the video, we want to invite you to keep watching this. I guess like a dialogue between Sergio and I. And Sergio, if you just want to give our audience a little sneak peek of what's coming, so they can understand where we're trying to go with this effort.
You and I were on the radio last week, and you talked about the cumulative advantage that your wife was able to bring to your family, and the generational advantage that she
Mm-hmm.
received from like her father and her grandfather and her great grandfather before her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really interested in that is how do you take this narrative that I'm pushing, which is that we have ordinary Latinos in the United States have more financial power than the entire venture capital industry in the United States, first and foremost. Secondarily, that our protagonist is going to be young, female, and furious. But then also, like, what is it that we're going to do in business that's going to elevate our narrative, and working with you and working with the United States Business Association of E-commerce to really explain how to take advantage of cumulative advantage, as opposed to saying that we don't have anything and that we're cash poor and that we're all of the prevailing narratives that exist for us, right? Like, that's really what I'm interested in doing with you.
I love it, Sergio, and I think we're gonna have some very meaningful conversations over the next few weeks. And everyone who wants to, you know, chime in into this conversation, make sure that you leave a comment below. We would like to hear from you. What do you think about this? I mean, we just share with you guys one stat that I didn't even know about it: 100 billion in remittances from uh, Latinos and people that live in the Caribbean. So just try to digest that number because it is a pretty big number. So from there, now we're going to leave it with the video, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Sergio.
Gracias,
So
Tayde.
what does it mean to be young, female, and furious? Well, for me, the first thing to know is that it means to furiously embrace whatever that term means for you. So for me, at the age of 41, youth means something different now. It's not just about chronological age. At 41, I'm experiencing new things that I never thought possible. At 41, I have a sense of urgency unlike ever before to make the world a better place. At 41, I have a renewed sense of innovation, wanting to see the world differently, wanting to approach things differently, and being open. At 41, I have a sense of hope that I never had before. And that hope allows me and it fuels me to leave nothing on the table. And typically, those things are associated with maybe being in your 20s and being naive and, coming into the world being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. But as I've aged chronologically, I feel that those dimensions of newness and innovation and hope and regeneration, they've gotten stronger. And so to me, part of being young, female, and furious is to redefine what youth means to you. And so to do these things as a woman of color, to have this mindset as a woman of color, is something that's also part of my young, female, and furious mantra. So I'm not the first in this world to embrace and to normalize humanity and to normalize being fully human. I come from a long line of ancestors who have fought to do that. So for me in this day and age, to be young, female, and furious means that I will normalize and I will seek to normalize and I will fight to normalize people's full humanity. I'll do it with a sense of just fervor and a sense of passion. Because if everyone doesn't have their full humanity acknowledged, then none of us really do. And so I end this by saying, be young, female, and furious in your own way. But know that these things that we say that we want to do, these things that we say that we want to be, do it for something good. Furious doesn't have to have a negative connotation to it. You can be furious about peace. You can be furious about change. You can be furious about wanting to see things better. And so that's what I leave you with. My own definition of being female, young, and furious, young, female, and furious, however you want to say it. It means just leaving nothing on the table, being unapologetic about who I am, who I want to be, and to always lead with love and do that above and beyond what I see around me when things seem so hateful and things seem so just dire. So that's it for me. That's what it means to be young, female, and furious.